Lamar Jackson's usage has come into question after week one and him feeling a little sore and reportedly needing a day on Monday. We talk about what it means for the Ravens, Derrick Henry's usage, and a lot more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today, making Locked On Ravens both a part of your day and your first listen each and every day for and available for you all podcasting platforms. That includes video form on YouTube, audio form, wherever you get your shows for 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 in a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Midweek edition of the show as we turn the page away from week one and look ahead to week two against the Las Vegas Raiders. But we still have a couple of more things to dive into as we put a bow on that Kansas City Chiefs loss. Here to talk about that with me is from the Ravens Talk podcast. It is Sam Njoku. And Sam, tough loss for the Ravens on Thursday night. They clawed their way back and are literally a toe away from that game-tying or even potentially game-winning touchdown. How you feeling after it?
Feeling pretty good, actually. You know, there's a lot of things that I took from that game that were positive, obviously some negatives, but it's week one of the NFL season, and I'm just glad that football's back.
Yeah, 100%. And again, after we saw some of those other teams in week one, like Cincinnati, like Cleveland, I think if you're looking at Baltimore's loss, you're feeling a lot better about it, considering it was the back-to-back champs. And look, I think for a lot of these teams, it is almost a preseason game, especially for the Ravens, who did not play any of their starters in the preseason. But it just counts a lot more when it's week one. But for the Ravens, Sam, a lot to look ahead to, but I want to get some of your thoughts on the game first. The Ravens in this one went up 7-0. Whether Derrick Henry touchdown, they used him a lot on that drive. Chiefs come back and make it 7-7. Then game flow kind of got away from the Ravens. Didn't utilize the run a lot outside of that with Derrick Henry. Lamar Jackson used his legs a ton, 16 carries in this game. How did you think the Ravens' game plan and how they adapted to game flow was? Did you like what they did, or would you like to have seen them do a little bit more, particularly with Derrick Henry?
I would have loved to see more Derrick Henry, especially in the early goings. I kind of understand where they were coming from. The run blocking of the Ravens wasn't very good. The Chiefs were definitely closing those holes, and the offensive line, especially the interior linemen, weren't doing a great job of creating those holes for Derrick Henry to run. So a lot of it went on Lamar Jackson's shoulders, which I'm sure we'll get to. So I understand the reasoning behind it. I just think that if you're going to beat a team like the Chiefs, you cannot be one-dimensional. You have to be able to run the football and be effective doing so. The Ravens obviously did get 5.8 yards per carry, but a lot of that was with Lamar Jackson towing that rock. So I think moving forward, I'd love to see more Derrick Henry, but understanding the situation at hand for the Ravens, it definitely wasn't an AFC Championship game situation where the Ravens were very successful running the football and just chose to stop. It was a situation where the Ravens weren't really getting much going on the ground, and they knew that Lamar Jackson had to be the guy to do it. And with the scoring that the Chiefs are doing, it just seemed like it was going to be the Lamar Jackson show moving forward.
I think in some aspects, definitely a very similar conversation to the one that we had in the AFC Championship game after that loss. But to your point, they still ran the ball with Lamar, obviously, and some of those were scrambles, wasn't all designed runs for Lamar. But 16 carries in this game, as I mentioned. He ended up having, it was 273 passing yards, 122 yards on the ground. So Lamar kind of playing some hero ball in a lot of ways, honestly, for this team. But he was getting physical out there. We obviously talked about that body transformation, him dropping a lot of that weight, says he's feeling good, feeling spry. But he was lowering his shoulder into guys. He was taking hits. He was not backing down from contact. And I think, that fires you up. But at the same time, it's like, every time that any quarterback gets hit, not just Lamar, it's like kind of like, oh, get up, come on, get up. That's any quarterback in the league. But Lamar missed practice on Monday, Sam. And we heard reports from Mike Garafolo, from Adam Schefter yesterday on Tuesday. And essentially the message was he just needed an extra day. He was sore and beat up from the game against the Chiefs. And for a lot of people, that has sparked the conversation, especially paired with John Harbaugh's Derrick Henry comments from Monday, which was essentially, we didn't bring Derrick Henry here to be a 30 carry guy. It's about Lamar and Zay and Isaiah likely and Bateman and all these guys, Andrews. It's all about, well, the big conversation point is, well, you don't want to overuse Lamar and you don't want to, expose him to all of this. Do you think that this is a trend? This usage for Lamar is a trend that we're going to see for the entire season? Or do you think this was just we need to try to throw the book at Kansas City to try to get a big win in week 1, and we're going to see that usage dialed back a little bit for Lamar?
I certainly hope this isn't a trend. I mean, I think, and I mentioned this on my show last week, the Ravens really wanted to win this football game. They wanted to set the tone for the season. You could tell by the way the players acted after the game and during the game. They were really fired up for this game. And so a lot of that, you saw Lamar Jackson trying to set a tone with his physicality, and it cost him as far as getting some practice time in this week. I do think the Ravens are serious in the fact that they don't want Derrick Henry being a 30 carry back, but 20 to 25 is the sweet spot. I don't think you can have Lamar Jackson running 16 times and sustain a healthy quarterback for 17 games this season into the playoffs. So I think moving forward, the Ravens will be more diligent in their usage of Lamar. Definitely expect more runs out of Derrick Henry. And if not just Derrick Henry, then Justice Hill. Remember, Justice Hill only had 1 carry for 3 yards in that game. So getting him more involved, and if Rasheen Ali gets healthy from that stinger, maybe having him be included in that offensive trend. But for sure, 16 carries is a lot. Now, the Ravens' motto is do what it takes to win, and they were really trying to win, so they're not too upset with the 16 carries. But you can't have that for 17 games straight. That's going to be a lot, and I don't expect it to be so moving forward. But to the point of John Harbaugh, they'll do whatever it takes to win. So you may see a couple of games where he's running 16 times, and if they get the win, more power to him. But I don't think that trend is sustainable for 17 games.
Yeah, and that's been the big word, is sustainability for Lamar, especially over these last couple of days. I think we've kind of seen that conversation come back out of the dark, and everybody's now talking about, well, is this play style sustainable? Is this usage sustainable? Lamar's play style is sustainable. We know that Lamar's, that is not, and I see that's the conversation that's coming out of the woodwork, and I'm just like, no, that's the wrong conversation. Put that one away. The right conversation is his usage right now from the Ravens sustainable? And again, it wasn't all designed Lamar runs. He had to scramble, he got out into space, and I thought he did make a lot of good decisions of just taking rushing lanes when he had them. But part of this too is, if you brought in Derrick Henry to platoon with Justice Hill, you shouldn't have brought him in the first place. I mean, you have to be able to use him in the bell cow. And that's not what the Ravens have done over Lamar's career. They have not had a bell cow. It's been, whether it's Gus Edwards or J.K. Dobbins, or if you want to go back, and Kenneth Dixon during his rookie season, or like a bunch of other, you can pick a name out of a hat. They didn't have that 20 to 25 carry guy on their roster. And look, 30 carries, I agree with you, Sam. Like, yeah, you shouldn't be running Derrick Henry 30 times a game. I agree with that part. But 13 carries, especially for a guy where in that first drive he had 5, they were looking good. Yeah. Part of the reason you bring Derrick Henry in is if it's looking good, teams have to creep up into the box. And if they start to cheat in on that, just like we saw the Ravens do on that first drive, Lamar can take that ball, he can take it to the edge, he can work play action off of that. And there's so many ways, and it just felt like, Sam, we saw that on that first drive, and then we just never really saw it a ton after that, and then it was the high usage for Lamar. So all in all, I don't think the sustainability conversation should be put on his play style. That has already been answered, and we don't have to have that conversation. The answer is an astounding yes. But in terms of his usage, I think right now, and I'll just, I'll do the quick math here, 16 times 18, or I guess 17, I'll do minus 16. Look at this. We're doing quick math here on Locked On Ravens. That's 272 carries for Lamar this season if he has 16 carries. That, to me, from a usage perspective, is not sustainable.
Yeah, you can't have that for your franchise star quarterback. Maybe if you got Justin Fields back there, for sure, go for it, or Tyrod Taylor, why not? But Lamar Jackson, you saw it as far as the offense is concerned in that Chiefs game. You need Lamar Jackson to be healthy if you have a chance to win a championship, and 200-plus carries ain't going to cut it. So hopefully the Ravens learned that lesson. As you mentioned, the Derrick Henry usage was great early on, using him to kind of get those defenders to cheat up into the line of scrimmage. They need more of that. So hopefully week 2 moving forward, they implement more of that, and Todd Monken learns his lesson a little bit, and maybe we don't get 16 carries from Lamar Jackson in week 2.
Yeah, and I think that, too, his arm complements his legs and his legs complement his arm. And that to me is the big part of it, where I think you just want to show off his entire skill set. And instead of him, and look, scrambles will happen, and that will always keep his carries up into maybe even a higher range than the Ravens wanted it, because he will make things happen. And again, that's not the question we're talking about, because Lamar should absolutely run the football. Lamar should absolutely play to his strengths with both his arm and his legs. He has plenty of strengths with both. But from any quarterback perspective, anyone, and Lamar has actually become one of the smartest quarterbacks in the league with his body. Like that Kansas City game, I think, was an anomaly in terms of him just being super physical and lower on his shoulder into guys. I don't think we necessarily see that for a lot of other games this season. But to me, Sam, you mentioned it. He wanted this game. The Ravens wanted this game. I think for Lamar, his play style, keep doing it. Keep spamming it. Because we've seen the success, and, I don't care what anybody says about, his play style isn't sustainable. It is. His play style is sustainable. But you just want to keep your quarterback healthy, just like, guess what? All other 31 teams want to keep their quarterback healthy. And if you're not utilizing the players that you brought in, because the whole thing with Lamar, Sam, the whole conversation was, well, Lamar has to play hero ball. Lamar has to put on the Superman cape, and he has to be Superman for the Ravens. And you bring Derrick Henry in to alleviate some of that pressure and alleviate some of that from him. And then in week 1, you don't really use him that way. And so it's like, all right, Lamar, so, taking the Spider-Man suit out, he's looking at it and he's like, all right, got to put it on again. We got to go. That's not what you want. You want to have your players that you brought in be able to complement Lamar, to take some of that off of his shoulders so he doesn't have to be Superman every week, both from just him doing it all, but also just from him taking the brunt of a lot of this contact, which, again, it's not an issue with him. It's not an issue with him and, he can't stay healthy. We're done with that conversation. It's about him and the Ravens putting him in the right positions over the course of the year.
Yeah, and I think that, it's twofold. One side of it is, take what John Harbaugh says with a grain of salt. I really don't think that he's the type of guy to give you all the information, but if he was honest, he'd say the offensive line did not give Lamar Jackson a lot of opportunities, nor did they give Derrick Henry a lot of opportunities. We had to use what we know to work, and that's Lamar Jackson escaping the pass rush, and it was getting there. I mean, I looked at the film. It just seemed like Lamar Jackson had no time in the pocket, and, of course, Derrick Henry was getting hit in the backfield more often than not, especially after that first drive. So I think if the offensive line can get together, gel, maybe make some personnel changes. I know that's a tough topic for John Harbaugh, but do something to fix that O-line, and I think a lot of this alleviates itself. I don't think you see much in the way of Lamar Jackson getting all those carries and Derrick Henry getting so few. So I'll refrain from judging him too harshly until week 4, week 5 in the season, but I give him a pass because that offensive line was definitely struggling to create holes for Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I give it about a month. So, week 4 before we kind of get those early season trends and we can kind of stop saying, let's give it a week-to-week basis and then kind of getting up to speed. So once we hit that week 4, week 5, I'm right in that timeline with you. Mm-hmm. Then we'll start to see what's going on with that. But coming up with the second part of the show, Sam mentioned the offensive line. We're going to dive more into that, what we saw illegal formation-wise, and also what to expect heading into week 2 with that group. Stay tuned. Lots to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, and I love going on FanDuel and checking out all that they have to offer. We have something a little different for you now through September 22nd. All FanDuel customers can bet $5. You get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel any time. So for the Ravens and Raiders game in week 2, the Ravens open up as 9.5-point favorites in that game. If you like that line, head over to FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com. Download America's #1 sportsbook. We are back. Our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher and Sam Njoku still with you here talking Ravens football. And Sam, that offensive line, I think, is going to be a concern point for the entire season. How much of a concern point, I think, will vary throughout the year. I do expect them to be better. Again, and I know you and I have talked about this as well, where Linderbaugh missed almost all of training camp. They're bringing in all these new guys. They're rotating guys in all these positions. It's hard for them to get continuity with this group. But I think as they play more with each other, that will alleviate itself. But that consistency will be big. What was not consistent was the illegal formation penalties in the NFL. The Ravens, and I laid these stats out. Now we actually have the official ones with Monday night being done. but I'll read these off to you, Sam.
Okay.
Ravens had 5 illegal formation penalties. We all know that. Rest of the NFL, 17 total. 17 total. You want to exclude Monday night, it's 15. So you end up having the stats before Monday night. It was 0.52 illegal formation penalties per team, not on the Ravens. And then you want to we're having a whole math lesson here today. We want to go 17 divided by 31. 0.55 per team. So the Ravens averaged 5. Every other team averaged 0.55 illegal formation penalties. John Harbaugh stuck up for his guys. Ronnie Stanley said that they got clarity on this, and John Harbaugh mentioned it too in the preseason and training camp. And then Ronnie was lining up closer than he even was then and still got called for it. And we saw egregious examples over the course of not only Thursday night from the Chiefs, but Friday, Sunday, Monday of other offensive linemen doing worse than Ronnie Stanley and not getting called for it. My thing, Sam, is if you want to call it one way, call it that way for both sides. I don't care. Look, if Ronnie Stanley was doing it and not doing it the right way, okay. But then call it that way on the Chiefs too. Call it that way on the other team too. And it felt like the NFL kind of used the Ravens as an example and where they were kind of the poster child for this whole thing. And then all the other teams saw it and said, we're going to try our best. And then even when they didn't do a good job of it, they still didn't get penalized in a lot of aspects.
It's so hard to get my finger on what exactly it was, because my initial thought would be, okay, well, they're going to use Thursday Night Football as an example for how you do it. So call it on Ronnie Stanley, sure. Call it on the Chiefs if you're going to do it like that. Both teams were doing it incorrectly by their standards if you want to go off that, but they didn't. It was just strictly the Ravens. So that's where my head is scratching, what's the deal? And then to your point, the 0.55 for the rest of the league, it seems as though the league just said, okay, well, never mind. We're not going to do it anymore. Obviously, the Ravens were right in the fact that they were being targeted, and we're just going to step off of the whole, targeting these types of plays. So I don't know what the situation was, why it was just the Ravens. At first, I was a little on their side with Ronnie Stanley. Just move up a little bit, but he did so, and they still called it. I have no words. I don't understand what the reason behind it was. I'm sure the Ravens got a white collar explanation from the league and they'll move forward. But if this continues, we're going to have a real problem because the Ravens offensive line is already in flux and we can't afford them to move back, especially in situations where you would want Derrick Henry to have second and third and short situations. So definitely a weird set of events in the week 1 matchup with the Chiefs, but hopefully this changes moving forward.
My bold prediction is they call 0 on the Ravens this week.
That'd be great.
Kind of like okay, they're kind of like, okay, all right.
Yeah.
All right. You
Message
caught us.
Received.
Yeah. All right. You got the message. Now we're good. So that's my bold prediction on that one. But moving ahead to week 2 and kind of talking about that a little bit more for this offensive line. Obviously, John Harbaugh expressed confidence in it. And I mean, that's what he's going to do. I didn't expect anything less. Yeah. But there were certainly, you mentioned the run blocking was certainly subpar at best. I thought that Derrick Henry had a guy on top of him, seemingly in the offensive backfield a lot of the time in that game. Pass protecting, especially early. I mean, Roger Rosengarten, welcome to the NFL. First ever snap. Chris Jones gets a strip sack on you. The rotation still does not fly with me. I'm still not a fan of the rotation. I understand why they do it for health reasons and maybe to time up things. But the thing with that, Sam, is Roger Rosengarten being a rookie, either you throw him into the fire, he gets experience and he learns by that trial by fire, or he sits for a year and unless an injury happens, and then he just learns behind the guy. But you're kind of doing both. And I feel like for him, he could be playing really well for a couple drives. He's like, yeah, all right, I'm really trying to find my groove. I found it. Let's go. Oh, nope, sorry. Back to the bench. McCary's coming in. That's tough for a rookie. At least last year they were doing it with even Falele was a second-year guy last year. At least he had a year under his belt.
Exactly.
Do you feel like the Ravens are making the right decision with the rotation, or do you feel like they should just pick a guy and stick with it?
I think they should pick a guy, and it better be the right guy. I don't. One, cohesiveness is the issue, like you mentioned. Having 5 guys who work together for long periods of time, it just works. It helps. I don't know a lot of teams that do this rotation by committee, especially with the right tackle, a very, very dangerous position to not have solidified because, as you saw, you can put your pass rusher anywhere. Chris Jones just swims and gets past your right tackle. Give him the experience, let him grow, let him learn, and move forward with that. I don't understand the notion. I mean, I guess if you're a coach that prefers vets over rookies. I can see the inclination to do so, but it just takes longer to develop your players when you do it that way. Put him in there, let him learn, trial by fire, and I'm sure he'll be fine. There's a reason why you drafted him in the second round, and move on from there.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I think that they just have to make a decision.
Yeah.
I think it's just, I've been very vocal about it. I don't believe you can win a Super Bowl that way. I'd love for them to prove me wrong. I would take it on the chin. I'd say, all right, you know what? Please be my guest. But I don't believe in that right now. Now, the other side of this equation is they did pick a guy at the right guard position, and that is Daniel Falele. What did you think of his performance, and do you think they did choose the right guy? Would you rather have Ben Cleveland running up that position?
I'm going to be as nice as possible. But yeah, I just don't think that Daniel Falele is the guy. I just don't think that he has what it takes at this moment. We talked about cohesiveness. We talked about being together with the center and the right tackle for long periods of time, but he was getting beat on one-on-one matchups and badly. It wasn't a situation where you're just picking the wrong guy to block. It's just no footwork, no move. You're not even moving the defender the opposite direction. It just doesn't look good. Again, it is week 1. You're going against Chris Jones. It's a very tough environment, as John Harbaugh mentioned. So it's hard to not give him a pass, but you got Max Crosby coming up in week 2. I mean, you got premier pass rushers up the wazoo, and if you make the playoffs, you're not going to see these second and third string 3-star, if you're a college football guy, 4-star guys. You're going to see future Hall of Famers every snap. So you want to get the best guys out there. And for right now, Daniel doesn't look to be that guy. Of course, he can develop into that guy. I'm sure there's something that the coaching staff sees in him that we haven't seen yet, and maybe that articulates as the season progresses. But we saw Ben Cleveland. He was okay. He wasn't a Pro Bowler, but he was decent. He was better than what we saw in week 1. And I just don't see a situation where you can put Daniel out there if he suffers another poor performance against the Raiders in week 2.
Yeah, and I've said this, and for those who listen to Locked on Ravens every day, you've heard me say this before. But Sam, I think that you would, especially for the Ravens and where their position is right now, I would much rather have the floor of Ben Cleveland than the ceiling of Daniel Falele. I think that Ben Cleveland being there, I'm not saying he's this, amazing Pro Bowl guard, but I just think that Falele just doesn't look like one. He just doesn't look like a guard. And for me, I think at least you upgrade in the run blocking department with Ben Cleveland, even if the pass protection is somewhat the same. I think you upgrade in the run blocking department, which to me was the bigger issue on Thursday night. And I think even that, look, kind of like what we said earlier, I don't expect the Ravens to make a change until probably the first month of the season's over. I expect them to kind of try to ride it out, see what works. But you mentioned it. I don't want to scare you or scare anybody, but Micah Parsons, you got Dallas coming up. You got Greg Rousseau in Buffalo coming up. You got Trey Hendrickson, in Cincinnati. So it's not like, look, Chris Jones is a heck of a player and one of the best pass rushers in this league and one of the best interior guys, but it's not like it slows up anytime soon, like you said. So they have to be on their P's and Q's with that 100%. Coming up with the final part of the show, we're going to be looking more ahead to week 2 with that Las Vegas Raiders game, talking about some early expectations and who needs to step up. Stay tuned, plenty to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. This show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience to Formula for winning championships is also what keeps ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain a vehicle and level up performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has it covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. Or the parts you need or the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We return Locked On Ravens with Sam Njoku. I am Kevin Ostreicher, rounding out this midweek edition of Locked On Ravens. And Sam, week 2 is a game that to me, I mean, it's not a must win in terms of like, they're going to miss the playoffs. But look, I personally think this is the best saying I've ever come up with. So I want to set the scene for this one.
Right.
September losses don't matter in September, but they matter in December. Because, you're 0-1, you're 0-2. You can bounce back from that. But once you get to December, we know how big conference record can be. We know how big division record can be, how overall record can be. So those losses can come back to haunt you. And so for a Raiders team that struggled against the rushing game against Los Angeles, former friends, former Ravens, J.K. Dobbins doing his thing. Gus Edwards not as good of a game, but J.K. did his thing. You have to be able to establish the run early in this game, because as much as we talked about, oh, you know what, we feel fine after that Chiefs loss. It was a good loss. If the Ravens don't go out there and make a statement in week 2, and it's kind of like that ugly win that we've seen them have against bad teams, well, we would sit here and we'd say, man, that was a bad win. Like for as much as we're like, oh, that was a good loss against Kansas City, a like 19-17 win against the Raiders, we're sitting here and saying that was a bad win.
Yeah, and I could just see it now of John Harbaugh saying a win's a win. 1-1. We're 1-0 now. Next week we're trying to go 1-0 again. Typical Harbaugh stuff. But yeah, you're right. The Ravens cannot afford to lose this game or even win this game ugly. You really want to set the tone for the fans. It's the first home game of the season. For yourself, knowing that you lost a tough game against the Chiefs, play another AFC West opponent and lay an egg and just barely scratch a win. I don't think that's going to cut it, especially with the gargantuan task that the Ravens have with these opponents for the 2024 season. So you're right. The Ravens need to go out there and show that they've improved and that, this, monumental, well, I won't say monumental loss, but, close nail-biting loss to the Chiefs in prime time was just that. 2 juggernauts going head-to-head. If you show up and you lay an egg against the Raiders, it shows that you're just a meandering middle-of-the-pack team. You're not really built for the big stage come January. So I'll be very interested to see how the Ravens do, and the outcome of the game, win or loss, doesn't matter to me as much as how you win. Do you win excessively? Do you establish the run like the Chargers did, or do you lay an egg and barely scratch a win?
Yeah, and part of it, too, is with this offense, Lamar obviously put the superhero cape on. We talked about it, played some hero ball for the Ravens. Mm-hmm. But I think to me, well, he had a lot of passing yards. It was 273, and that compared to some of these other core. I mean, he's top 10, and I don't know the exact placement of where he is, but he's at least top 10 in passing yards this year. So with that, you then look at his yards per target, yards per completion, and it's kind of down more towards the middle to the end of that pack. I think that the Ravens, if they want to establish something, I'd love to see them get more vertical with what they do. We saw a couple of deep shots over the course of the game. They weren't able to hit on a ton. Obviously, that one to Rashad Bateman was great, and then Isaiah Likely made a lot after the catch on that. It was kind of like a medium-level throw that Isaiah Likely turned into a very long touchdown. But we saw a couple of deep shots to Rashad Bateman that weren't connected on outside of that one late in the game. So I would expect, hopefully, this is what I hope, the Ravens take a couple of deep shots early to be able to set some level, even if they're not successful. Just say, hey, this is a part of our game plan and we're going to use it, and you better be prepared for it. That, I think, will free up some of the box. And I think with that, you can work Derrick Henry in. You can work some of these short intermediate routes in. And also, I do expect a big bounce back game from Mark Andrews. I do think that the Isaiah Likely stuff, look, Isaiah's awesome, man, had a great game, and I expect that to continue. But the Chiefs made it a point to take away Mark Andrews in that game. And I think for the Raiders, it might not be that easy.
Yeah, and one, it will be kind of crazy for you to continue with that game plan, seeing how well Isaiah Likely can play if you leave him on single coverage. So they don't have the luxury, the Raiders, being a middle-of-the-pack football team, I'll give them that, to have Mark Andrews on double, triple coverage every game. So I do expect a bounce back for Mark Andrews. And I agree with you. The Ravens do need to establish a vertical attack, something they really haven't had since they had Hollywood Brown. So hoping with the addition of Tez Walker, if he plays, maybe get some deep shots down there along with Rashad Bateman. And then set those running lanes up, because right now teams are expecting you to run the football. And if you're not successful, it makes you one-dimensional, and it forces, as you mentioned, Lamar Jackson to put on that cape and become Superman.
Yeah, and going back to what we were talking about in the first segment about kind of the usage and things along those lines, not only for Lamar, but some of these other players as well. Do you think that Todd Monken can sometimes get a little too cute with what he's trying to do? Do you think that there is some aspects, especially I'll go back to early last season, where I think it was more of a problem then. I don't think it was that big of an issue in week 1, but I have seen the conversation, so I wanted to bring it up, of, last year was Zay in his rookie year. They were trying to use him on these sweeps and reverses and trying to get him going horizontally. And I'm just like, man, just use him in the vertical game. Get him going in the short intermediate game. Like, that's what they should have done. And I think, there were a couple of times in the game I was just kind of like, okay, what are they doing here? I think could have been simpler, but I have seen the conversation brought up like, oh, Monken's too cute and he should just, get back to basics. Do you buy into that conversation, or are you in a different boat?
I'm in a wait and see approach. I think in that last game, especially the Chiefs game, the Ravens ran a lot of screens to Zay Flowers, and I think that's by design because in the AFC Championship game, I was calling for screens. I thought that the way that the Chiefs were bringing in pressure, that a screen would have worked. But maybe some screens to the running back. I think that would actually help a little bit. Not a lot of that, but to that point, that wasn't really working that well. So they need to give it up. They're very hard headed. They're the type of team that wants to attack and establish dominance. But when it's not working, it's not working. And I think the Ravens would be better if you got more intermediate, deep passing game with Zay Flowers. I think he would excel at that. But for whatever reason, they choose not to. And maybe some of that is because those type of plays need longer to develop, and they don't really trust their O-line, even though, according to PFF, they were ranked about 8th in pass blocking in that last game. They don't really trust him enough to keep Lamar upright long enough to make those throws happen. But to your point, they need to really figure out something. But cute, I don't know. I think I give Todd Monken some grace because he's really trying to increase the productivity of these passing concepts, something that we didn't really see much with Greg Roman.
I think it gives you a pretty good insight on where the Ravens screen game is. Whenever they execute a successful one, all of social media is, the Ravens executed. Oh my God, we're finally, yes, 7 yards on a screen. Like that's kind of where the state of the Ravens screen game is. So
it's pretty bad.
Yeah, not the best. So I agree with you. I agree with you there, Sam. But let's kind of put the official bow on this Chiefs game. Lamar Jackson, that final drive, I thought was pretty masterful outside of those last couple of throws. Obviously, a couple of missed ones to Isaiah Likely and Zay Flowers. Did exactly what he was supposed to do in taking the short stuff. And that's something that I think a lot of people, myself included, have been kind of clamoring for is, Lamar doesn't have to, be that superhero guy and kind of make something happen that's not there. If you have a guy in the flat, if you have a guy running a short out, just give it to him. You get some solid yards right there. And he did that. The Chiefs weren't letting him beat him deep. So Lamar took it all the way down the field. But then those two throws are the ones that kind of stick out like a sore thumb. The one to Isaiah Likely in the back of the end zone. The other one to Rashad Bateman / Zay Flowers, whichever way you want to go with that one. What was your overall view on that Lamar Jackson final drive, including the Isaiah Likely just needed to be a shoe size smaller to get that touchdown in?
Yeah, I've analyzed that drive pretty extensively since it occurred on Thursday. And yeah, you don't get better than that. I think Lamar Jackson played that perfectly. The Chiefs weren't giving away anything up top, so a lot of underneath stuff was available, and he took it. They didn't have a lot of timeouts, so that's something we talk about with John Harbaugh very much so, his inability to really have great time management skills. So something I think if they had another timeout or two, this would have been a different outcome. But, as far as executing plays and making those throws, I thought it was great. The Isaiah Likely toss in the corner of the end zone, I think that was the first play after that Bateman catch, was just a poor throw by Lamar Jackson. But that throw, and I've analyzed it, and you guys can check me out on my website to look at it. That throw to Zay Flowers was to Zay Flowers. There's no way that pass was to Rashad Bateman in any stretch of the imagination, unless Rashad and Zay Flowers ran a completely different routes. That was definitely a Zay Flowers toss. That I put more on Zay Flowers than Lamar Jackson. I think you sit in that zone, and then that's exactly what Isaiah Likely did the next play, that was just a toe short. So I think Likely needs to get some white cleats, because if it's the white cleats he's wearing, there's no way that call gets overturned. It was that close. That's why I feel so strongly about this Ravens team being a playoff Super Bowl contender, because of the way Lamar Jackson handled those business. If the offensive line gets together, keeps the quarterback upright, keeps the running backs running lanes open, this team's going to be one of the best in the league.
Yeah, they got to shore some stuff up for sure, but every team does. And I think with the Ravens being the first game of the season, going up against the Chiefs, who are obviously the team to beat, it certainly puts some perspective once you kind of watch the rest of week one unfold, and you're like, hey, other teams also have to kind of shore things up. It's not just the Ravens in that boat there. But with that Isaiah Likely would-be touchdown, Sam, John Harbaugh held up that 2. He said 2. Oh, yeah. Were you going for 2 if you're John Harbaugh, or were you taking that game to overtime?
Oh, no, 100% going for the win. You got to go for the win. I'm all about going for 2. I'm the wrong guy to ask, because in my opinion, if you got a chance to win the game, go win the game. It's week 1. It's not the AFC Championship game. You go get the win. No one expects you to go into Kansas City and win the game anyway. So go in there. You got the most dynamic quarterback in the league. I think the Ravens go for it, and I think the Ravens get it. I think it's as simple as that. So very unfortunate circumstance that toe kept the Ravens from winning that football game, because I do, in fact, believe that 2-point conversion would have been successful and the Ravens would have walked out there with a victory.
Yeah, so many possibilities what they could have done on that play. So I take it you loved that couple years ago when Harbaugh was going for it for the win every single week. You love that?
I'm all about it. I'm all about going for the win. That's why one of the reasons why I love John Harbaugh. There's a lot of things to dislike about the way he coaches sometimes, but going for 2 is not one of them. Don't go for the points. Why? To give Patrick Mahomes the ball again? No. You got the superstar. You got the MVP under center. Go for the win.
Man. Yeah, I would have probably gone for 2 as well. I mean, look, we've seen what happens when Mahomes gets the ball in overtime, and for a lot of these teams, it does not end in their favor if you are playing Patrick Mahomes. So tough way to lose to Kansas City, but you know what? They put up a fight, and I was impressed with the way they clawed and fought back in the game. But Sam, appreciate your time as always. Thank you again for hopping on the show. Tell people where they can find you and what you're working on as the season continues here.
Awesome. Well, you can find me on Ravens Talk Pod on Twitter X, and you can find me on Ravens Talk Podcast on Instagram. You can also find my stuff at the ravenstalkshow.com. Also working on stuff on YouTube. You can find my show weekly or bi-weekly, depending on the week. And you can also find my pivotal moments that I started with, all 22 analysis of the top players and the most important players of the week for the Ravens. So that's pretty much it.
Now, Sam knows this stuff, and all the links will be in the description down below. So check him out, Sam. Really appreciate you again. And thank you to everybody who watched, listened to today's episode of Locked On Ravens. Be sure to subscribe and follow along on YouTube. Hit that like button. And also in audio form, if you're an audio listener, subscribe and follow along there as well for 5 days a week at the Ravens coverage. If you have a friend or a family member who likes the Ravens, wants some Ravens content in their life, be sure to send them our way here on Locked On Ravens. Coming up tomorrow, more Ravens content as we continue to look ahead to the Ravens Week 2 matchup with the Las Vegas Raiders. Stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.